Hello everybody. Just getting through the mess that is my desk. And let's see, how is everybody doing today? Got a nice view of the camera there. Let's try and fix that up. Alright folks, so new time, new live stream, new project. This is gonna be a pretty epic undertaking, I think. I'm gonna see if I can just use an extra light here to... Ooh, that was noisy. Sorry. See if I can use an extra light here to adjust the white balance a little bit. That's a little better. So this is not actually the project that well, it's kind of related. Boom! This is the new project. So some of you may have seen on my previews that I kind of mentioned that I was looking at doing this. This is the Mega Gargant from Games Workshop, and in particular I am wanting to do Hradoth, who is a character in a short story that I enjoyed a great deal from a White Dwarf a little while ago. He and his little friend Yagle are gonna be laying waste to a grot camp, just like the scene in the short story. This is gonna be my live streaming project for a while. I'm gonna probably be focusing in on this exclusively, showing you a bunch of techniques for really good modeling for assembly, sculpting, kit bashing, a little bit of modification, reposing, all of that kind of stuff to kind of give us a cool finished model, I hope, and hopefully something that can really sing on the tabletop. I don't really have a particular use for the model. I kind of bought it on a whim at a local store just to, you know, support the store when I went in to visit. I think, you know, it could fit with my Gits army reasonably well, although it's trashing some of the Gits. But then again, I guess, you know, Gargants are prone to doing that on even for their own side. So let's get started and see how we go with this. I really enjoyed this short story, and it kind of sparked some ideas for me to get sculpting and do a little bit of kit bashing. So I've got some notes ready. I've got some pieces for the kit bash. Now this project I am going to be working on, if not entirely, then almost entirely on this live stream. So if you guys tune in or catch it after the fact, I'll post it onto my channel after the fact. You'll be able to see pretty much this whole thing end to end as I work through it. I suspect this is going to be a fairly epic project. It'll take a little while to go through. So with that said, let me pull out the rules and we can show you guys a little bit of what I'm intending here. So the Mega Gargants come in 3 different flavors. We've got the Kraken Eater here. Can't get both the titles and the images in the same thing, but the Kraken Eater, who's kind of coastal, ocean-y. We've got the War Stomper, who I think of as like the most generic. And then we've got the Gatebreaker, who is, you know, kind of a siege engine kind of dude. He seems to be much more of an out-and-out mercenary. Now, for this particular project, I want to go primarily with the War Stomper, but I am going to be making a few changes to incorporate some of the, particularly the hood of the Gatebreaker, and the reason for that is that the hood is actually explicitly mentioned in the short story. I actually took some notes on rereading the short story to give myself some references. So we've got Yagle. I actually haven't yet figured out how I'm going to do Yaggel. He's going to come in a little bit later on. Hradoth is the main thing, and the big elements that are talked about is the black leather hood, the snack bag, and the silver Sigmarine shields for armor is actually not explicitly mentioned, but there's talk about gold shields for being worn by Hradoth's mother, who is a regular Gargant, I think. And she's wearing golden Sigmarine shields as armor, and I wanted a little bit of that element brought into this one. I figured I'd do silver because he doesn't get the nicest stuff, he just gets the less shiny stuff. And I was going to maybe mix and match it up, which is actually what these little bags of bits were for. Whenever I build a kit or do something, I'll clip off the extras and set them aside, and as a result I've got a bunch of leftover bits that, thanks to the reflections of the bag, you can't really see, but in here I've got some Lumineth bits from various projects in the past. I'm going to probably keep a couple of these shields aside for use on Hradoth. Let's pull those out and set them aside, ready to go. And then I'll likely do the same thing with the Stormcast bits bag that I have. I'm just going to set all of them aside for now, and anything I don't use I can put back in the bag later. I may not get this far in today's assembly, we'll see. It's also going to be a little bit dependent on how long my camera battery lasts. I'm running a slightly new get-up here, so it it may cut out a little bit abruptly, and if so, I apologize. I'll not be completely disconnected from the stream, but it will be a bit of an abrupt change. So let's see. Got quite a few of these, probably about 20 or so. I'm not going to give him like a full suit of armor with these. I don't think that really fits in with his vibe. But I will give him a few just as a, little bit of protection for the worst areas. And better to set aside too many than too few. So he is a big boy. He's going to need a lot of plates to cover him. So let's see. Okay. Now, with these kits that have multiple different elements to them, it's going to be a little bit interesting just to make sure that I'm putting the right bits in the right places. There may be some back and forth and desperately trying to undo what I've been doing. So I've got my tools here. I've got a little bit of post attack if I just want to kind of position something and see how it goes. A couple different sets of clippers. These are my coarse ones for cutting thick stuff, and then I do have a pair of the God Hands for a nice, good quality finish. I have a sanding twig that I just use for roughing the sanding, and knives for cleaning stuff up. As I said, we're going to primarily be building the War Stomper. So we're going to go to stages 4 to 6 as indicated in the instruction manual. And looks like the first step of step 4 is telling us to go back to step 1. So I guess there is some universal assembly. So let's shoot for getting the universal assembly completely finished off today. I'm going to set that aside off screen before Games Workshop decides to sue me for ruining their IP or something. There are a lot of pieces to this. 1, 2, 3 and a mini one sprues just for a single model. And this is the base said model is going to be standing on. I still need to think a little bit about the basing for him. I definitely have in mind there's a scene where he kicks Hradoth, there's another one where he kicks like a squig rider. So I'm probably going to go with something like that for the basing. May require a little bit of reposing as well, which we will have to do. I'm probably going to assemble the model first, or at least the bulk of it, and then do any reposing that I need to do, and sculpt in filling, etc. as I need to do that. So just so that you're aware, I'm going to set this aside for now. And this piece definitely going to need that leather hooded head. A seems promising, so let's work through A. Now, we're going to start with parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. So easy enough. And with the process that I use for clipping out stuff is I'll start by a rough clip at some distance from where it's actually connected to the model, just to get it off the sprue. And then once I've done that, I'll take my Gargant clippers and I will just ever so gently snip it right at the thing. And the nice thing about the Gargant clippers is that they are very, very sharp. It leaves minimal deformity on the piece itself. These are very, very broad contact points compared to a lot of models. These are big pieces. There's a lot of pressure needed to get the plastic to fill these molds, so just have to be a little bit careful there. And then once we've done that with a piece, we will go in and clean it up. Now you can use a sanding twig like this. Just smooth it out so that none of the blemishes are noticeable, the mold lines are all erased. So that's one option. Can take a little bit of time, and it can be a little bit difficult to access recessed areas. The other option that you can use is getting a nice, clean sculpting knife, and either using the back edge or the front edge if you're careful. You're just scraping, blocking the view there. Don't cut. You're angling the blade away from you, and you're just using some pressure to kind of scrape away any mold line. Okay, and this is a great way of cleaning very neatly less pronounced mold lines. It can be a little difficult doing it if it's very pronounced. With some of the blemishes of the contact points, the sprue points, you may need to actually cut away as well. Then if you're very careful and you rub your nail over the area, you should be able to get rid of that white and feel whether it's a smooth connection. So that's what we're shooting for. So gonna just keep working through all of the various pieces. Normally what I'll do is I'll actually cut out several pieces at once and go through this process. So just did this one on its own to demonstrate what I'm going to be doing. And clean that up. So anybody who's on the chat, let me know what you've been working on, what you've been doing, what projects you have in the pipes. I do love to hear what folks have been working on lately, so let me know. Alright, now this is part 1. Back to our course cutters. Snippety snip. Snip, 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 snip. is much snipping. So that is... And we need part number 2 as well, and part number 4. There is 2, and there is 4. Alright. Alright, and then we've got part number 9 here is going to be the next piece. So we'll grab that as well. And then we've got some smaller parts that we will get to a little bit later on. So next up we're going to just clean these pieces up. Getting rid of those sprue nubs. If you use sprue goo, which I'll be demonstrating in a little bit, these sprue nubs are excellent for just, you know, setting aside and throwing into the sprue goo. They're already cut down to size, and you've done it in securing, you know, your actual model assembly, so it doesn't feel like a whole extra chore that needs doing, which can be kind of handy, and you just kind of slide them on in. Now these Gargant snippers, a lot of these much more expensive, very precision clippers have a slightly different style to your standard GW clippers. With your GW clippers, both edges are pretty much tapered in the same way, and they are designed for kind of pinching and slicing through both halves of a piece. So as you cut, what you end up doing is crushing and cutting through kind of to the middle, as you saw there, right? So as I go in, if I stop it, a little bit late, but you can see both sides have started cutting, and there's a lot of white showing up on the plastic, and what that indicates is that there is stress being applied to the plastic, which is what causes the plastic to go white like that. With Gargant clippers, they're really not designed to go through a piece as thick as that. What happens is this side here is actually slightly thicker. I'm not sure if I can get an angle that's going to show this clearly. But this cutter is thicker than this one. The left-hand one is just a very, very thin. You can see it almost vanishes at that angle. Very thin blade. The other one is much thicker. And so the thicker one kind of goes up against the sprue, and it's just the thin one that kind of cuts through, causing a lot less deformation, a lot less stress on the piece, and gives you a much cleaner cut as a result that's a lot easier to finish cleaning up. Obviously the degree to which you kind of pursue this perfection is open to, you know, user preference. These were kind of developed with Gundam model builders in mind, and the reason that a clean finish is so important there is because Gunpla kits are not really intended necessarily to be painted over. So oftentimes you'll just leave a Gunpla in the coloured plastic that it comes in, and different parts come in different colours. There are a few stickers for extra detail, but the intention is very much that you do not need to paint your model to have a fully finished kit that looks good on the table. And so to that end, a lot of Gunpla model builders will go to great lengths to try and ensure that they've got a perfect finish on the surface of their model. It can also be very helpful if you're doing clear canopies and things like that, because obviously you cannot paint those and still have them completely clear. And so stress marks become very important, although there are some ways of getting rid of any blemishes that you find. So just going through. And as you'll notice, doing several pieces at the same time, doing each stage kind of across them, it's just like batch painting. It makes the whole process go a lot quicker, as you're kind of not picking up and swapping tools and trying to figure out what you're doing next, and realizing you've missed a piece and going back and forth, and it's just a much quicker process, really. So I'm not getting these completely flush at the moment. Some of the angles are not super convenient, but that's okay. We shall persist. So I'm just going to move these two out of the way. Just a nice little cleanup. Actually see a mold line along this part. And trim. That was because of the shape of the surface there. That was quite a difficult one to clip smooth, so I've got to put a little more effort into cleaning that part up. Right, inside of the leg last. Oh, and the loincloth. Must not forget the loincloth. Okay. Alrighty. So I'm actually just gonna let that glue start setting whilst we clean up the other pieces. So this here is sprue glue. I start with Tamiya Extra Thin Cement. This is plastic cement. Plastic cement is a solvent, so it dissolves the plastic, and then the plastic rehardens as the solvent evaporates, and you get cross bonding as the plastic strands kind of bond across the divide between the two pieces. So it's a very strong bond. It's basically impossible to break because you've effectively made it a single piece of material if you've done it well, which means that you are not really going to be able to undo it without, you know, stress fractures and deformities of the plastic. It also means that you can take bits of the plastic and dissolve them into the solvent to get this kind of sprue goo, which is a slightly thicker adhesive that also acts as a gap filler, and once it hardens and the solvent evaporates, it means that you're actually dealing with exactly the same material as the pieces on either side, right? It's all the same plastic, which means that it's much easier to sand. You're sanding it at the same rate as the parts around it, so you're going to get a nice, good, smooth finish. A lot of scale hobbyists, scale modelers will use super glue as a gap filler and then sand that super glue off. The problem with that is that the super glue is harder than the styrene plastic that the model itself is made from, and so you end up often kind of sanding the plastic to either side faster than you're sanding the super glue that you're actually trying to sand away, and you kind of end up with this kind of these dips on either side of the join, which is not ideal. So I'm just gonna leave that to one side and let that cure whilst I get on with the next piece to clean up. Time and patience are definitely your friends with a nice clean assembly. You don't need to complete the whole kit in an hour. If it's going to take longer, it takes longer, and you're going to get a much better finish as a result, which is my preference most of the time. From assembling a whole ton of Dark Elder or something, I may not go to these lengths. I probably wouldn't scrape away all mold lines. I'd just get rid of the contact points, smooth them off, and any particularly egregious mold lines that are going to be super visible on the finished model. But for a centerpiece like this, it's really worth just taking a little bit of extra time and care over it. Now, these parts, there's big organic volume, so you're going to get really noticeable joins between the two parts, and that's where our sprue goo is really going to come in. So I'll be able to demonstrate that in a second. If any of you folks on the live stream have any good tips for assembly, let us know. Put them in the chat, and I'll shout them out as they come in. And, speak to them, whether I've tried them, what I think, etc. You know, just help get that knowledge out there, right? That's what this is all about. Just helping us all get better at this hobby and share those findings, those tips and tricks. Alrighty. One more piece here. Okay, and there we go. That's our initial set of pieces assembled. So, what we're going to do now is very carefully with the sprue goo, do a quick test fit. Now the purpose of this test fit is to just be really clear what edges are going to be meeting and what are not, right? So it runs from this joint here all the way down to the point where the fabric starts tapering on that side. There's a break, and then on the other side where the fabric tapers all the way up, around, underneath, and then actually it goes up along this piece as well. So we want to get our sprue goo, we find a wider point where we can start, draw it up along the whole length of the part so it goes up to there but no further. It's usually not the end of the world if you do take it too far. As I said, this stuff is sandable and it's going to be soluble as well with the plastic adhesive, so it's actually quite hard to see where that tapering of that fabric there begins, but well, ends I should say. I think we're okay there. And we keep going up and up and up. That's one side. And then on the other side we're going to go in and through, and because this has some volume to it, what's going to happen is as you press the two halves together, it's going to seep out slightly and give you kind of like a weld line. And that you can then sand away for a nice, perfectly clean finish, hopefully. So, here we go. We've got that pressed in. Line it up. Press those two halves together. Keep applying that pressure for a little while. Let it harden. Now the difficult thing here I always find is making sure that you haven't accidentally got some on your fingers and then touch it to some other part of the model and all of a sudden have a kind of fingerprint embossed into your model. But I'm hopeful that I have not done that this time. Fortunately, these are quite large pieces to work with, so it's a little bit easier to handle than some of the finer model pieces. Alright, and so you can see, hopefully, along here you've got that kind of little bead, and along the leg piece here as well you can see that little bit of beading, and if needed you can kind of work that a little bit more to ensure that you've got it nicely all the way along. Then when you come back in and sand this all off, you're going to have a nice completely smooth surface, and once you prime over that you won't even know that there was a join there. So we're going to do the exact same thing over the other side, again with our test fit. So all the way along there, right up to the edge on that piece of fabric. Where the seams are there, all the way up to the angle there. So again, take our solvent, try and err on the inside of the model as much as you can, you know, so that any excess, the majority of the excess will flow away from the line of sight, so that you're not having to sand away too much. If you're heavy-handed with this, you can end up losing detail on the sculpt, and that's really unfortunate when that happens. It's best to avoid it wherever possible. Remember, if you've got two different actual surfaces interfacing, so for instance here, where it goes from flesh to the fabric, you don't have to worry too much about the getting that bead, that nice bead of sprue goo, because you don't need it in that instance. You're going to have a visible join there in any case, so it really doesn't matter very much. Only as far as the stitching goes. Oh, and I think that is the whole area that we need to worry about, so we're gonna just pop that in, up all the way around, press it in. Oh, and there I've gone and done it and put my finger in the glue. Unfortunately, I think I caught it in time. Now, if you've got grabbers or something where you can actually brace this and apply a little bit of pressure to hold it in place correctly, that's the best thing to do. I do not have that, so I'm going to be holding this for a little bit just to let it start setting and kind of fix itself in place before I let it go to finish curing. Okay, set that down for the moment. Now there are a couple of leg coverings here that we'll need doing. Parts 10 through 13. But first I'm going to do the belly, 14 and 15. Get those pieces nicely set up now. Those of you that have been watching my channel for a while will remember my previous sets of live streams back when I was still in the UK. I actually went through the process of painting up a regular old Gargant back in the days before the Mega Gargants had arisen from the Games Workshop stores. With that, one of the disappointments that I always had was that I was not careful enough on hiding the mold up the side of the torso. So I'm going to take a little bit of extra care with that in this model to really make sure that I am hiding that well and it's not noticeable on the finished model. So it is very difficult with these kits because they're so big. Really obscure those contact points, those joins in the finished piece. And last one, I think. Pop. Back in with our X-Acto. Just clean up all the parts. Keep going around and around and around. Do. Okay. I think that's good enough. And the other half. Okay, there's a couple contact points down here, but they're going to be completely hidden, so it's not really worth worrying about. So, once again, dry fit. You can see that there's going to be something put in here, so we don't need to worry about this rope too much, but we do want to be very careful with these lines here and make sure we're masking them completely once we're finished. So got a good sense of where the contact points are, and what I'm going to do is just quickly go in and run this up one side, down the other. Make sure I capture everything, don't use too much, spread it out as necessary. Okay, probably not quite enough there to give us a perfect bead as we go, but it's a good start. So we've got a good, oh, there you can see perfectly. It's a nice little seam covering there, and once it's hardened properly and we sand it down, it's gonna look perfect. So that one, this one, as I thought, it's a little bit weak here, but other than that, you can see at the top it looks pretty good. At the bottom, it's getting there. Mostly good. So leave that piece to harden as well. Next up, we have the shoulders, parts 16 and 17. So we'll this piece here. So 17 is here. Is here. Top tip, do not catch your fingers in the cutting blades, that's painful. So there we go. Crack out the god hands again, just give ourselves a nice clean. Now, these instances where the contact points are along the join edge, you do still want to make sure that those are pretty flush, and the reason for doing that is because if you don't, those are going to force an additional gap between this surface and the surface it contacts, which is usually not a big problem, but it is much more work to clean it out from the gap filling perspective. It's going to take a lot more work to seal that gap and hide it so that it's not visible. And that piece there needs to come off. On to the next. These ones, however, are probably going to be less significant because they're inside of the actual form and they're not going to block up the build. So just a little bitty check for mold lines, a little bit of the one under the arm there, it's on the opposite side. Games Workshop stuff, I still maintain, you know, for the most part, the casting is clean enough that you don't have to worry too badly about mold lines and things. Some of the older kits, it gets worse as the molds start to wear a bit. But generally speaking, it's they're designed to hide well, and where they can't do that, you know, it's usually a clean enough mold that it's not super visible anyway. Especially with a model like this, the much bigger issue is going to be the joins and the parts, and making sure that those are cleaned up nice and flush. Okay, and excess there. There. Okay, so we can now do assembly here. Not a lot of point of contact on these two parts. Mostly the biceps by the looks of it. Tiny little bit on the inside on this side here. But the other side actually they don't even meet at all. So, grab our glue. Nice healthy bead going. Too much, but as you can see I was able to let that drip down on the inside of the sculpt, and it's important that you keep things in mind like this so that you don't actually apply too much and end up ruining the detailing of the model, because if this stuff goes over fine detailing it will obscure it. Okay, I have to be very careful here to avoid getting my fingers covered in plastic cement, but there we go. Just pinch that one a bit. Side, and these are fitting together pretty nicely all on their own. So we'll leave that one be for a minute. I'm going to want to let those cure properly before we proceed. We can come back to this one now. Still going to take a little bit of time for this to cure enough that we can sand it. It has to be really fully cured to be able to sand down. But we can get the back part of his clothing on here, cover that flabby backside. This, I think we're intending to keep a visible seam here to justify the stitching, but we are going to want to mask this one. The bottom piece, it can look like it's two separate bits of fabric, I guess. That's not a big deal, but the top piece, it's very clearly meant to be a single piece of fabric. Underneath, I mean, that's not not a big deal. So what I'm going to do here is a slightly different approach. And you actually saw me do this with the first piece that I applied, but I didn't really talk through the process. So I'm going to put on a generous amount up here, and a less generous amount up here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it at that as I put this part into place. Apply a little bit of pressure there. We've got a good bead forming along this edge. Focus is not really helping me out here, but good bead along that edge. But there's no adhesive down here, but we can just paint that on because this is all internal, so it really doesn't matter. And that will give us a nice solid join. So sit and hold on to that, have a swig of beverage. Now, if you are following along at home, or if you're a dab hand at assembling these Mega Gargants, what you'll notice is that I assembled this piece separate to the belly, but the instructions actually tell you to assemble it onto the belly, kind of apply one part and then apply the other. I am pretty sure that I'll be able to kind of press that on and adhere it without having to worry too much about it. And this way I can get the assembly kind of parallelized and completed a little bit quicker. So that's my excuse for not reading the instructions properly, and I'm sticking to it. Alright. This will actually take us, once we assemble these pieces together, it takes us to the end of the stage 1 assembly, and we're now then on to step 4 of the assembly. So what I might do, given the time here, streaming for about an hour, I might call it at this point and just assemble this up and then come back in the next stream, and I'll probably kick off the next stream with cleaning this once the glue is dried. I may do a few little bits and pieces before the next stream. In particular, what I might start doing is cleaning up some of the parts of this model, removing elements that I'm not going to be using in the stream, and just working with a slightly cleaner set of parts for just for ease of tracking as we go, and just to have a little bit less unused plastic floating around in the box, so that I can keep things on task. Don't know where that came from. A little bit of tape there. Okay, so let's see if we can start this final assembly process, get that on camera before I call it for today. So we are going in there, we're filling that gap in the arm there, clipped on. Okay. So pretty straightforward, so we're just following it all the way around. And here we go, so. It's again a little heavy-handed, but not a problem because it went inside of the model, which is always our aim. If we screw something up, we want the excess to run inside so that it's not visible in the finished thing. This back piece, this seam isn't going to be visible, so we don't need to be trying to form a bead there. We just want to soften the plastic so that it'll form that bond. And then once again, I think the best way in is to get the back part first and then just pop and get that in. There we go. It's not too bad. One thing to be mindful of with sprue goo, it's not perfect. I really like it, and it's my primary tool for assembling plastic models at this point, without a doubt. But this stuff contains a solvent, right? It's got plastic dissolved into it, and it's got quite a bit of plastic dissolved into it to give it that volume, that substance. But the solvent is going to evaporate, and the result of that is you're going to see shrinkage, right? I've seen videos on YouTube where people use this for just casting, right? They'll just pour this into a mold and they'll use that to cast pieces. And the problem with doing that is as the solvent evaporates, there's going to be shrinkage on what you're playing, on what you've poured in there. So you're going to end up with less volume than you initially had. It's going to pull away from the edges of the molds, and it's generally going to, not necessarily take the detail to the extent that you initially thought. Similarly, when you're forming beads, it means that these beads are going to be, the beads on the join here are going to be smaller than they initially appeared to be as the plastic glue, the solvent in the plastic glue evaporates, and the thing hardens. So do be mindful of that. This is not like a two-part epoxy or something which will have exactly the same volume once cured, or pretty much exactly the same volume once cured as it did before it was cured. That's why I don't actually use this stuff for straight up casting. Okay, now I think this is probably the most forgiving join part of the whole thing, because there's fabric and string around this whole edge, so the surface is not going to be skin to skin at all along this, or fabric to fabric of the same piece, so we can probably be a little bit more relaxed on this. Having said that, because of the stage of the assembly we're at, we're probably not going to get another stab at applying the adhesive, because it's going to be very difficult to get at this join as it's trying without just taking the whole thing apart again. So on balance, I'm still being pretty generous with my application here. Very cool. Remember, unlike me, you probably still want to be avoiding touching those curing joins, because the beads that you've got nicely formed there can still come undone, unglued, and stick to your fingers, and then stick to other bits of the model and ruin everything, like I'm pretty sure I just did with the chest there. But there we go. We have a body for this big ass model. I will leave this as it is now until next time, and then together we can come back in and work on cleaning away all of those beads. I'll probably have a little bit more of a tight focus on the camera to really give it a good focus on what we're doing in that instance, so you can really see clearly as I clean up the model there. So for now, thank you all for joining. This is, as I said, probably going to be a long project, a fun endeavor. I am actually really looking forward to painting this whole thing up and really, giving some life to a story that I very much enjoyed. and an extra unnecessary unit for my Gloomspike Gits army. So there we go. That is it for now. Thank you all for joining. As always, if you enjoyed this, please consider liking the video, subscribing, maybe even checking that bell notification so that you hear when I do future live streams and when I put up my other video content. In the description, you'll see links to my affiliates. The affiliate links will give codes for discounts for Herrick Games and Hobbies. That's $10 off your first order. For Elric's Hobbies, that is 10% off of any order you make, which is great for you guys. It helps me out, it helps the channel out, it helps me keep doing this stuff. So please do consider it. And until next time, thank you all for joining. Have fun, keep hobbying, and later days. Bye, folks.